To try and change the world. Well, we're going to try and change the world, but it might just take a little bit longer than one day. Mike Love is one of the organisers here, and I thought, Mike, it might be very appropriate to just put into context, what's this all about?
It's such an important time, I think, in the world. Economically, the media, what's happening in the Arab Spring, what's happening with the Occupy movement. So many things that we took for granted that were so solid as part of our society until recently, the cracks seem to be coming. And on the one hand, people are protesting about the cuts and where those cuts should fall. And that's one approach. But the other one is about where are the new springs, the new seeds of hope, the alternative ways of doing things if the old ways aren't working. And I suppose what we hope today is about is partly looking at those things and saying, so what do we do? What do we do? Not what do people at summits do, but what can we do at a summit?
And I know we're calling it the Leeds Summat, but it's more than that, isn't it?
It is,
we don't
yeah.
want to be Leeds-centric.
To be honest, Harry, we would have liked to have called it the Great Yorkshire Summit, but we felt that was, Leeds has already got a problem in the region with people thinking that we're above ourselves and all the rest of it. So it's in Leeds, but I know there are people from all over the region here, and indeed from much further afield than just Yorkshire and Humber. So it's in Leeds, but I think only 3 of the workshops actually are Leeds specific.
Okay. We can't change the world in a day, but we can go a little bit towards it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are so many people here and so many other people doing stalls and workshops are about change. They're about changing mindsets, thinking, changing practice on the ground in terms of what we actually do. And today is about profiling those things, spotlighting them, helping people to make connections, really. That's what we're hopeful.
Well, you're one of the organisers. I think a round of applause for Mike and all the people that are involved in this. Well done, Mike. Enjoy yourself. Mobile phones. We love them. Can we just turn them off? Or put them on silent? I was in my golf club the other day, and we were around the table, and the phone went off. And everybody looked at each other. I picked it up, and it was on speakerphone. And I said, hello. And the lady at the other end said, hello, darling. I said hello. She said, do you know that BMW soft-top convertible car that was in the garage for £30,000? Well, we can have it for £25,000. Can I have it? I said, yes, you can have it. She said, oh, darling, I do love you. Put the phone down. 2 minutes later, it rang again. I said hello. She said, hello, darling. She said, do you know that house that was £400,000? Well, the estate agent said that we can now have it for £350,000. Can I have it? Of course you can have it. Oh, I do love you, darling. I put the phone down and said, does anybody own a mobile phone? So just be careful about that. Our panel, for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to take questions from the floor. I've got some questions here. I really want you to get yourselves involved as well. But rather than me do a long diatribe about our panellists, I'm going to ask them, and I'm going to give them 30 seconds or thereabouts to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about them. So would you be so kind, Robbie, to start it all off?
My name's Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. My name's Romy Smith. I'm a poet, playwright. I also teach here part of the week at Leeds University. In 2007, I was appointed Parliamentary Writer in Residence. It's a historic appointment. It's the first time in history there has ever been a Parliamentary Writer in Residence. And I was based in the Palace of Westminster for about a year and a half. Until fairly recently, I was Poet in Residence for John Keats' house, the Romantic poet, and his house in Hampstead, and wrote in response to his work and life. And I believe in poetry and the power of it as a form of protest and as a movement for change.
Thank you very much indeed. Next gentleman, please. No, it probably needs no introduction.
Harry, good morning. My name is Hilary Benn. I'm the Member of Parliament for Leeds Central, and we're sitting in the northern bit of the constituency this morning. I'm here today because I was very keen to attend. I just wanted to say, in terms of what I've done in the past, having had the opportunity to be both the Minister responsible for our overseas aid programme for development and for the environment, really did change the way in which I think about and see the world. And I think those two, plus the economy, represent the 3 great challenges that we've got to address. looking around the room, I don't know if I'm the only person wearing a tie. I just wanted to explain. Oh, well, Harry, you are, right. Phew. The trouble is, if you're a politician and you turn up in an open neck shirt, you're likely to be mistaken for a Conservative, and I wouldn't like that.
Ooh, Hillary, really. Mariam.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mariam. I was a student here at Leeds University. I'm now a pupil barrister in London at a human rights set. The main motivation for me to come here today is to meet you all and hear about your perspectives. I went into the law primarily because I had an interest in challenging government policy and looking at this fine balance between the rights of the individual and the rights of the state, and how are those finely balanced. So the set that I'm at does a lot of public law work, judicial review work, with a specific focus on immigration and housing. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them, and I don't think I can say any more.
Thank you, Mariam. Yep, Nicola, can I just move the microphone around? I'm teetering on the brink here. I don't want to go back in hospital. There we go.
Hi, I'm Nicola Greenan and I'm very nervous, so please bear with me. I represent the Leeds 14 Trust, which is a development trust based in Seacroft, Leeds. I grew up on the estate and still have lots of family and friends that live there. I'm very proud to come from the area. Over the last 4 years, we've been developing an organisation which is based in the heart of the estate and does some wonderful things on a daily basis with some wonderful people. I'm here today because Mike very kindly asked me, and I said, oh my God, most of the time people are trying to shut me up, never mind and get me to talk. So delighted to be here today, and I hope everybody else has a fantastic day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Gerald, please.
Thanks, Harry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gerald Jennings. I represent Land Securities. For those who don't know, Land Securities is a property developer and investor. We invest in property and places, and locally we own and manage the White Rose Shopping Centre just in South Leeds, and we're also in the process of developing the new leisure and retail complex in the middle of Leeds City Centre, Trinity Leeds. And the reason I was particularly pleased to be invited to come today actually was to try and add, I guess, a business dynamic, a business perspective to some of the conversation, because I think it's hugely important at days like this that businesses engage and have a voice with the greater community.
Gerald, thank you. Just excuse me while I... Thank you, Gerald. Maurice?
Thanks. I'm Maurice Glassman. I'm from London, so, you know, sorry about that. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm a Labour peer, made a peer by Ed Miliband. I'm not wearing a tie, so maybe you can place me on the right of the party, possibly. I've been working with London citizens and community organising really for the last 15 years, working on living wage, affordable housing, interest rate cap, that sort of thing. And I was really delighted to hear about this and to be here. And Leeds is a very, very important city, and to think about how sort of relationships and community life can be renewed.
Lord, thank you very much indeed. That's our panel. It's the best we could afford. So I think you'll agree that they've got a wide perspective that they can offer. I'm anxious to take questions from the floor straight away, but I wonder if I might just start with an opening point, really, about the civil unrest, the riots that we've been experiencing from August. Not just, of course, in the cities, but they extended to St Paul's Cathedral, Wall Street, New York, etc., etc. Should we be concerned about how it's going to affect us here in this region? What are our views about this, and how we can stop it from happening again? Anybody like to kick us off? Hilary?
Well, I think I would make a distinction between what we saw in August, because there was a specific cause that started it all in Tottenham, and that was the shooting of that Mr. Duggan and what happened to his family, and then things kicked off there, and there was then a copycat elsewhere. I would distinguish that from people are out protesting because they think something's not quite right in the way in which we are doing things, and that is self-evidently the case, and we are living through the consequences of having done things in a way that is not sustainable. The task, and this is what today is about, is to find a way of doing things in a different way, and protest raises the issue, but we've got to find the answers. Okay.
I think there's a good point to separate out what happened in Tottenham, but you have to look at the other statistics around Tottenham as well. I mean, in the lead up to the riots, aside from the shooting, there was a closure of around maybe 40% of the youth clubs in that area. It's one of the most deprived areas in the whole of London, and there are massive inequalities and exclusion of youth in particular. So I think you have to recognise the importance of young people in this equation. If you exclude young people from the debates that are happening, you're not going to find the solution, because essentially they are the ones who are on the streets. So I think it's very important that the part of the process of change is involving young people from the very beginning in these kinds of discussions.
Okay. Romy?
It's interesting that you raised that question in the month, November, that marks the beginning of 200 years since the uprisings amongst the Luddites and the Luddite movement. I think one of the things that shocked me most was hearing David Starkey's comments about the protagonists involved in the riots. I think one of the things that struck me, if we looked at the newspapers, was the array of people, the rainbow of people, the millionaire's daughter, the schoolboy, the teacher, the pensioner, people who were arrested. And I think we have to look at the thread that kind of links those very different protagonists from the stereotypes. The stereotypes were that it was young black men, working class black men, taken to the streets. So all the racist stereotypes came out to play. But it wasn't that. There's something there about what's happening within our society at the moment. Cuts, which we know very much about. A government that says that we're all in this together, and yet actually its cabinet knows more millionaires than any other cabinet before. The level of inequality widening.
We need cuts. Let's be fair. We haven't got any
Well,
money.
do we? Stella Duffy, quoting Winston Churchill during the Second World War, said when Churchill was asked, why not cut, particularly in terms of the arts, and he said, what are we fighting a war for if we cut the arts?
Okay, Romy, thank you for that contribution. Anybody would like to add anything to the debate? Can you just shout up, sir, and I'll try and pass on your message? Oh, have you got a mic? Thank you. I'll just try and keep this going as best I can. I don't want to be involved in this. This is your show.
I just don't think we've heard anyone say what a debt of gratitude in Leeds we owe to the youth leaders of Hay Hills and Chapeltown, who turned out and made a huge, huge difference in our city. Nobody told them to come out. Nobody paid them to come out. They just came. And these young black men who came out made a big difference.
Thank you for that contribution. Gerald?
Yeah, I think it's quite noticeable that, and I think I'm right in this, that during the recent riots up and down the UK, Leeds was fortunate in actually not experiencing the same. And I think that's a huge compliment to everyone in the community. And I think from a business perspective, it is hugely important to us what's going on, because believe it or not, business is part of the community. And it's hugely important to us that wherever we operate and wherever a business operates, that the wealth that's created is spread across all aspects of the community, and whether it's the youth, whether it's any disenfranchised part of the community, I think it is so important. And I certainly see certain businesses, and I can't be sort of too general about it because I don't think it does happen across the whole piece, but I do see certain businesses really engaging with that new dynamic, with that new paradigm, if you like, really realising that they need to engage with the wider community and spread some of that wealth that they are creating. I don't think we've seen enough of that. I think we need to see more of it. But I think there are companies which are leading, and we need to look at those leaders. We need to look at best practice and share that across the whole piece.
Gerald, you will say something in a moment. Anybody else want to add to this at this point? If you do, put your hand up and we'll try and get a microphone to you. Nicola?
Yeah, I think there are companies that are doing that and leading in that way, but there's the other side of it as well. We have a huge organisation on our estate that does nothing to engage with our community. Am I allowed to say who they are?
Yeah.
Tesco's. You know, I think probably why we didn't have any riots in Seacroft is because it was all we had was the Tesco's, and it's too big an open plan, so it was like, well, how would you get away with it?
So you could do with a little bit extra from Tesco.
We could do with a hell of a lot extra.
Any more? Yes, lady at the back. Can we try and get one to the lady? Sorry, love, we'll get one there eventually. Just bear with us for 10 seconds.
I'm told that one of of the reasons that the riots did not spread to Leeds, despite the fact that there are many disadvantaged groups in areas such as Chapeltown and Harefield, for example. We mustn't be just too naive of this, because there was actually, I believe, a very coordinated action to prevent the riots spreading. And one of the reasons why that was successful is the fact that there have been very good links made by the authorities, by police, by the youth leaders, with all the representatives and leaders of the various minority ethnic groups in these disadvantaged areas. So, you know, it wasn't entirely spontaneous, and I do stress the importance of ongoing community links.
Thank you for your contribution, that's very significant. Maurice, would you like to... Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm from Stoke Newington. I'm a Spurs fan, so that's, I think, an important consideration. So obviously on the night of the August the 6th, I had to go down and make sure that White Hart Lane was properly protected. And I just want to share with you what I saw that night, because it was pretty shocking, really. So 40% of the youth clubs were closed down. I basically saw the remaining 60% getting burnt down. I mean, it was the youth clubs, it was the social security, it was the government agencies that were actually burnt down, and then the curries and the other shops, they were basically looted. What was really interesting was the rage was directed against government, against local authority. Going more deeply into that, what you could see was that all of the government-funded youth work and thing is that more than 80% of the leaders from there, this won't mean much to you, lived in Barnet. Right? They were out of town. They weren't from within the local communities. And what you saw that night, I mean, the head of Harrogate Council was there, Hillary, and no one knew who he was. There was a complete disconnection between the people living in Tottenham and their supposed leadership. In other words, there weren't local leaders from Tottenham who could stand up. Where were the adults who could stand up, who had support from within the community? And what you saw was violence, what you saw was lawlessness, what you saw was consumer lust, what you saw was rage. And just to say that was shocking. So I walked down the road, just want to tell this story, walked down the road from Tottenham down to where I live in Stoke Newington. And there you had something else. There you had Kurdish and Turkish sort of shop owners who were basically with baseball bats and knives, some of them armed, who were basically enforcing vigilante-style justice. The police were nowhere. Carrying on walking down the road, went to Hackney, sort of sub-Tottenham, leaderless, violence thing, then walked down to Whitechapel, where the Jamaat Islami Mosque, the East London Mosque, it was Ramadan, it was incredibly evocative. Groups of 15 people imposing essentially civic order, getting people off the street. So what I'm saying is that suddenly a lightning bolt came down, and what you could see was the following things, which I think we've got to discuss. The first of all, the lack of effective local leadership, local ownership of leadership in Tottenham and in Hackney. The second one you were seeing was ethnic, faith-based, vigilante policing going on in areas where there was civic order. So my reflection on this is quite radical. We've got to really genuinely engage in the development of genuinely local leaders. It's fantastic to hear the story from Chapeltown, fantastic to hear the stories that there were, where there is local leadership, people will not destroy their own homes and their own areas. Where there's not local leadership, there can be real trouble. So the real stress on building of local forms of politics, I think we've got to think quite radically about that. Local forms of politics where the leaders genuinely represent the people who live in those places. And secondly, the basis of civic order, we've got to think about broad-based solutions where what I noticed is that the different communities were not working with each other. They were doing it on their own, on their streets. And we've got to think of a broad-based way of strengthening civic peace and prosperity through developing the leadership from the people who actually live in the areas.
You can tell he's a Tottenham supporter because he never stops talking, but there we go.
Never stop winning.
Never stop winning. Very good. Look, I'm anxious now to move it on to a positive note. Can we, I know you've got an observation, just one final observation, then can we have can we move on as to how we can get ourselves away from this ever happening again? So, would you mind, Madam, a short comment?
Well, it wasn't an observation, but I do know, and probably a lot of people in Leeds know, that Chapeltown wasn't easy during that period of time. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of control exerted, and there's a lot of things that weren't reported. And it was a positive outcome in the long run, but things happened in Chapeltown that a lot of people really weren't party to the information. Look, you live there and you're on the streets. The thing I wanted to ask was, in terms of where we're going, in terms of better community connections and how do we ameliorate the situation we're in, do you really think that we have a solution that's about coming out of the recession of the 80s by just growing more? Or are we really at a historic time that the question of our political, economic, social model needs to really deeply, fundamentally change to something more sustainable?
Thank you for that question. Thank you. I think that's got something for all our panellists to get their teeth into now. So the change has to come, this lady feels, because if it doesn't come, we're going to find ourselves back in the same situation. Would somebody like to respond to that, to kick off from our panel? Gerald, thank you.
I think you're absolutely right, actually. There does have to be a change. I struggle with the idea that it has to be as radical as perhaps you were suggesting, because I would have to suggest that economic growth, economic prosperity, jobs, the well-being of the community, wherever that community is, has to start with the fundamentals, with the basics. And that is about wealth creation. Because if we don't create the wealth, we don't create the money, we can't then use that in ways which we all, I think, accept that we should. Now, I think that the bigger question for me is how we use the wealth that is created. And I think that's where I would like to see a change. I think it's disappointing to hear what Nikki's just said about Seacroft and her relationship with a major UK and international corporate body. I don't know how you address that. I don't know how you convince the likes of that company and others who don't engage, as perhaps other companies do, to have that change of mindset and really understand that they are a part of the community. Whether they like it or not, they are. And you can't get away from the fact that Tesco do operate in Seacroft. They're not going to go away. So the question for me, and the trick, if you like, for me, is how you get companies like that to really engage with the community. And I think that's really, really important that we try and find that answer. And I think some of it does come back to what I said earlier, which is looking about best practice, looking at sector leadership within certain of the business sectors, and then trying to use that peer pressure to a certain extent to convince those that they need to sort of wake up and smell the coffee, if you like.
Jerry? Thank you for that. I've got lots of reaction here. Yes, sir. Can I have you very briefly, if you would, sir?
Yeah, I think we've heard there, it is a classic statement of the attitude that we can't tackle the root cause of the problem because we need economic growth. Now, economic growth is supposed to bring jobs and prosperity to ordinary people. The facts are that it does not. For the last 20 years at least, the majority of people have not been made wealthier by economic growth. It is a tiny minority at the top whose incomes and assets have risen by 5, 10, 20-fold. That model of economic growth is broken. It is not sustainable ecologically. It is not sustainable.
We can hear you. You're doing well.
It is not sustainable socially, and it is not sustainable politically. We have to rethink the growth model.
Thank you.
It does not work.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your observation. I think it was Mike that told me this morning that the gap between the rich and the poor in Leeds is one of the most significant throughout the whole country. Any observations on how we can narrow that gap? Because this gentleman seems to confirm what's just been said there.
Oh, well, we have to deal with, surely, the utter kind of absurdity and insult, particularly in this economic climate, of bankers' bonuses. I mean, that's one of the things that has to be completely redressed. So, I mean, certainly that's something that I would want to see. I also, dare I suggest it, I think that a ceiling on how much people are earning. I mean, I'm not too sure that I think that anybody needs to, you know, people don't, back to the previous question, the first question, people don't revolt and uprise when they feel safe, warm, that there's a sense of a stake that they have in their society. Martin Luther King said, you know, it is dangerous to create a society where people don't feel they have a stake in that society, because if they don't have a stake in that society, they unconsciously want to destroy it. And I think for me, that's what we saw. So, yeah, bankers' bonuses and ceilings.
Interesting, isn't it? A minimum wage and a maximum wage as well.
Yeah,
That's,
I think so.
Tottenham would be a very ordinary side if they had a minimum wage or a maximum wage, wouldn't they? I think they would anyway. Anybody else like to offer something from the floor on this? Yes, sir. Shout it out now so loud, we're going to mic to you.
I think one of the points about inequality is around land. There's huge inequalities of land, and it's really interesting that Nicola's sitting next to Gerald, because in Seacroft, all the land's owned by the state, by Leeds City Council. But Gerald develops land privately, but most of the land in this country is owned by private landlords, by hugely wealthy individuals like the Duke of Westminster. And very few is owned by ordinary citizens like us, who maybe own their house on a mortgage or not own any land at all. And that is one of the underlying issues around inequality, around this lack of land, lack of security. How can we tackle that? I mean, last year Andy Burnham suggested, as a moderate new Labour politician, very brave, that we should have a land value tax, not on what you earn, but on the value of your land. Now, is that a way forward, or is it another way to make a more equal society through better ownership of our land in this country?
Thanks for your question. Gentlemen, wants to make a comment here as well. Can you just get the microphone? Try and keep...
I see it is the dominance of the market and society's over-reliance on the market, and the position that the City of London has within those markets to manipulate them and to make sure that, that growth does continue, but only to benefit a small minority of people. What we really want to know about isn't the making of profit, but it's rather how that profit is then, those funds are then distributed.
Thank you for that. Right, one or two things there for the panel to...
Can I just make a quick comment?
Yes, Gerald. Briefly, please.
I think in many respects we're not actually disagreeing, and certainly with the last gentleman there. It's how one distributes the wealth. And if we look at Leeds as an example, and I see it every day, Leeds is an enormously wealthy city. The city centre is enormously wealthy. A lot of that wealth goes to the north. I see very little going to the south, where we own and operate White Rose, for example. And the question for me is, how do we make sure that the wealth that's created in the city centre is evenly distributed and goes to those parts of the communities that really need it, rather than perhaps goes, by and large, to the wealthier suburbs? And that's the real question for us. It's not trying to undermine the economic system, in my view, that we have, and by and large has worked very well for this country.
Okay, Hilary?
Well, look, I agree with the banker's bonus tax. I think it's right that we've got a 50% tax rate, and I'm sorry there's some people who want to get rid of it. A practical proposal for Leeds, because you're right, the gap between rich and poor, the difference between the prosperity of the city centre and life in many parts of the inner city. When people are coming to invest in the city, and there are examples where this has happened, and they're looking for workers to come and work in whatever business or operation it is they're setting up, then the deal ought to be, if you're unemployed, we will train you, you meet our standard, and we will give you a job. Now, it's a very practical thing that we can do within the city ourselves. There are examples of where it has worked, because we have to link the two together. We do have to create the wealth to pay for a lot of the things that we rely on, and we have to acknowledge it. I think the biggest question is, what is the alternative? Going back to your point a moment ago, a sustainable way of having an economy, a sustainable climate, sustainable way in which we use resources. What does it look like? Now, we're in a market economy, we can debate the perils and the benefits of that, but you need to bring the value of the things that we are destroying into economic decision making. And the environment's a really good example, because we've always taken it as a free, and yet we rely on the natural environment to grow food, to provide us with fuel, to clean the air, to give us clean water, what in the jargon is known as environmental services, but we don't factor them into decision making. And if you take a decision which is going to damage those, there is a cost, not just to us today, but to our children and our grandchildren. And it's how you make that change.
That's very good. Right. One or two comments here.
Very briefly, it's a great panel. It's fantastic to have a diverse range of views. I'm most impressed that Gerald comes and takes all the flack that is going to come. So thank you very much for doing that. But actually, Labour has got to take some flack as well, because the answer to Hillary's perfectly nicely phrased question used to be socialism. And it used to be, so it should now be socialism with a green colour and a freedom-loving colour. And that is not being talked about by the Labour Party. No. However much Miliband might be nudging it to the left, it's not going far enough. And the answer to this whole crisis is a full-scale revision of capitalism. And the only substitute, however imperfect the models are internationally, and historically they've been abominable in some cases, the only alternative is what used to be called socialism, and the S word should come back into our discourse.
Thank you for that, madam. Please, you were nearly brief. A bit briefer, please, if possible.
Okay. I don't know if this is working at all, so I'll just shout. I wanted to come back to... dropped in on Occupy Leeds on Thursday, small but growing, with a very sort of sympathetic article in the Evening Post. And it's just a fascinating kind of set of events linked with the Arab Spring, with the dissent in Spain and Greece, and now the Occupy movements globally. I just... exciting. Not interested in political parties or conventional sort of forms of left-wing organising, which is interesting. And I would just really like to hear from everybody what they take from Occupy.
Occupy. Very briefly, do we get anything particularly from it?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief and not mention football. So so first of all, in relation to the Occupy, very interesting story going on in London. You know, they stumbled upon the steps of St Paul's, and then they discovered this thing called St Paul's Cross. Now, it turned out that in Anglo-Saxon times, St Paul's Cross was the place that they would ring the cathedral bells and the people would meet, and this was the oldest democratic practice in the country. Now, this was one of those magical moments where people just discovered the democratic tradition, and what they discovered was that was the foundation of the Corporation of the City of London. That was the foundation of the oldest democratic city in our country, which is now completely devoted to the interests of money. Right, so this is where we've got to be. We've got to challenge, and I think Ed did great with Murdoch. I think it's really important now to move on and challenge the power of capital. Because what we've got here is an enormously wealthy institution, and the only way we can challenge it, I always talk about socialism, just to let you know, but it's not statism. And this is vital. And the answer is to build so there's three kinds of power, right? There's money power, which we know about, which is absolutely represented by the City of London. There's state power, and it's people know that I think that Labour was too quick to move to state solutions. And then there's relational power, there's democratic power, there's the power that's generated, and we've forgotten about that. Now, Leeds has got great traditions of that, in its chapels, in its faith traditions, as well as in the trade union traditions. So what's vital, for example, about land is that, so there's the cuts agenda, that's one thing, but then there's £10 billion worth of land that's being sold off. Now, I think that there should be community land trusts, that land should be transferred to local communities in perpetuity for the nation, so that we can build family housing. If the freehold cost's knocked out, that's half the price. We've got to think quite radically and quite traditionally, in some ways, about family life, about what we need to live. And on a...
Briefly, Maurice, please, I'm running out of time.
I think we've got to talk about a Leeds City bank, a regional bank that can provide capital for the local area so that business can grow. I think there's got to be a big democratisation of the unions, and they've got to turn towards the good. On one note, on Tesco's, we've got London Citizens, we've got a living wage campaign going with Tesco's. For 2 years, they didn't answer anything that we did. And then the riots came. And suddenly, they said, well, we're the only supermarket that actually has shops in these areas, and we're not pulling out of them. And how comes we thought people really liked us? How come people hate us so much?
All right, Maurice.
And
okay.
Just the answer we gave was,
come on.
You should pay your workers properly. That would be a start. So,
Maurice, thank you. I've got 4 minutes left. If only my wife would give me that long, I can tell you. Right, who wants... These are contributions now. These are statements, please. Anybody else at the front? Yes.
I just wanted to say, I was in France when the riots happened, and we looked at the TV in horror at what the stuff happened in the UK, and we thought, they are too where we were a few years ago. It seems to me that we shouldn't forget human nature in this. We all have the power, the tendency to cling to the powers and the ownership that we have. And I think we're struggling with a philosophical debate, which is we need ownership, because in ownership is commitment. But on the other hand, anybody, even in this room, have the power to become very self-righteous as soon as we grab any power. So I think what we're looking for is a new way of having a moral framework, one which is no longer imposed through fear, which is what we had before through the many religions, but one which is coming through want, because we realize this is, and we are struggling with knowing how to do that, because if we institutionalize it deeply, we can then put too much restriction. I think nobody knows how to do this.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's funny, you asked Yorkshire folk to be briefed, and then we've had Americans, we've had other people. They can't be brief either, so it's good as that. Really, one final point, and I'm going to wrap things off. I'm sorry, time has flown.
This will be
brief, please, sir. Thank you.
It is, what we're all here is for a sense of justice, and I welcome Gerald here engaging in that. The rich need to pay their taxes. That's it. Fundamentally, Philip Green, others, they need to pay up. The high street needs to pay up. Taxes need to be paid by us all fairly. Justice.
Thank you for that, sir. Right, and I'm going to be 30 seconds. I've been told I've got to wind up now. So you've heard a little bit about what the people think about this, Romy. So what do you think we can achieve?
Well, I think we are in small ways. I just want to quickly talk about a group that I'm proud to be associated with called Leeds Young Authors, and a phenomenal film called We Are Poets. If you want an advocacy for young people, young people's voices, it's winning awards across the country right now. You need to see that film. It's an advocacy for Leeds. It is about poetry as protest. It's about poetry as social commentary. It is about uprising. The Buddha says that it's your mind that creates this world, and this is about young people using words to define their world in their way. And I also have to quickly mention as well, you raised a question before about the Occupy movement, and I think what I take from that is inspiration. Inspiration. We saw Nawal El-Saadawi out there on the street, poet, civil rights activist in Egypt, out there on the street. Poets have been there as the kind of politician sort of spokespeople through language to distill momentous occasions for centuries, and that's what we see, poets being there at the forefront. I just want to read very quickly a quote from Audre Lorde, just to leave you with. She says, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid."
Thank you, Robbie, for that contribution.
Just picking up that last point, Roosevelt said in the 1930s, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And the truth is, we know that things aren't right. What most people want to know is, what can we do about it, and what does a different way of living look like? And I want to come back to where we started and what today is all about. It's what we can do here in the city, because when people see things in a different way, different ways of generating energy, whatever it is, they think, aha! And human beings are very creative and ingenious, and we've got the skills we need to do it. We need to find the ways. And I just picked one example. Someone shouted out the Leeds Credit Union. Who was it? Yes. Well, I was there yesterday morning. They've got 25,000 members in the city. There was a big queue almost out the door of their office in the city centre, people coming in for loans for Christmas. Now they're charging a very, very reasonable rate of interest in opposition to the doorstep lenders and others. Now, if more people knew about the Leeds Credit Union, it's a homegrown Leeds way of giving people the finance they need, helping them with their lives, managing their budgets, and we've done it for ourselves in this city. Let's have more of it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to be very brief. I just wanted to draw on an experience I had when I travelled with Oxfam to Brazil for the UN Habitat Conference. And Brazil is one of those places that has, particularly in Rio, the massive inequalities between the rich and the poor, which we are now seeing happening in Leeds. I've said it before, but the vital role of youth within that process of change. If you exclude the youth from these kinds of discussions, you will not get the change that you want to see happening. I think I'll leave with three key words that I've heard balanced around here, and they are justice for the individual, valuing the individual as a member of a larger community, and changing the consumerism culture that has overtaken Britain. And that's really all I have to say.
Mariam, thank you for that. Nicola?
I'll just take it obviously back to Seacroft and what this all kind of means to us. And I think what I take from what people have said today and understanding of how things work up there is we've had sort of 3 decades of sort of no confidence in that area and no voice, or no loud voice anyway. And it's building the confidence of people in these communities that's actually at the core of making things change, especially for us up there. And in terms of occupying, I think what we should do is all occupy Tesco's, and I'd be a happy lady.
Thank you, Nicola. We got the point. Don't sit on the fence. That's a nice thing.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks for the comments earlier on, actually. Clearly, I am from the business community, and I was hugely pleased to be here and part of this relatively brief conversation. It'd be great if we could have another hour, actually. But being part of the community from a business perspective, I'm also as an individual, I'm part of the community. And what strikes me is that they are really so interlinked that we'd be wrong to think about business over here and the community over here in a sort of oil and water way. We need to get across that sort of Rubicon, if you like, and somehow get that oil and water, if we think it's oil and water, to mix in a cohesive and larger way. And one little example of some work that we've done as a company, which because companies can make a difference, believe it or not, they can. And sometimes in big ways. What we're doing in Leeds will create 3,500 jobs, but also sometimes in very small ways. We engage with a youth club called Cardinal Youth Club in Middleton. They needed a carpet. We helped them with a carpet for the youth club. The day that carpet was laid, the members of the youth club turned up and they took their shoes off to walk on the carpet. And I thought that was quite emotional, actually, and I thought that was hugely, hugely important for me and other members of my team and my office to see and understand. We can make a difference, sometimes in small ways, but we need to make a difference in bigger ways as well.
Gerald, thank you for that.
I guess two real reflections on the discussion. The first is to completely support Hillary's thing about the credit unions. I mean, this is so vital. The banks are lending at 0.5%, but there's people in Leeds, Providential, they're lending at 800%, 1,000, and Christmas is coming. They don't get the humiliation of not being able to afford to give gifts. So I really think we've got to think quite radically and say, let's say 5% of the bailout money to endow local, non-usury based, to expand the credit unions so that there can be money for local families and businesses. I think that's a... And the second, which is related to that, is the crucial thing is not to be a victim, not to think like a victim. You've got the power, you are the power, and to build the relationships and change the city. That's the key.
We could have gone on for a lot more time, as you appreciate. Thanks so much for your contribution. It's been very, very important, very lively, hope quite positive as well. Let's give a round of applause for
And thank you very much, Harry, as well. Just back to stick with us. So really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Some very quick instructions from me. First of all, the culture of the day. We've actually got now 6 hours together. We haven't just had this hour, we've now got 6 hours, workshops, sessions, and the idea is it's now us. It's all of our time to contribute, talk together, and so on. If you want to take a break from something that's really doing your head in, there's music, there's art stuff, there's film, there's the terrace bar where there's just going to be some nice DJ music and so on. And then this evening, we're going to have a chance to really relax to some fantastic music and food over at Notre Dame College, and Honeydrum are going to take us over there in festive procession. So that